Welcome back to AIY Global, where we break down the global shifts shaping politics, economics, and power. After driving out Chinese companies, one African country is now paying a heavy price. Oil prices in Niger have surged by more than 300%, leaving the government scrambling for solutions. Just last month, Niger ordered senior executives of several Chinese firms to leave within 48 hours, while also seizing the accounts of Chinese-run hotels and refineries. Officially, the military government cited salary disputes, but the consequences of this decision hit hard. Within a week, diesel prices skyrocketed beyond the reach of most citizens. Faced with this crisis, Niger is reluctantly back at the table, seeking to reopen talks with China and hoping for renewed cooperation. This raises a critical question. If Niger once chose to push Beijing out, can it now expect China to step back in? Niger's dilemma is not unique. Across the global south, from Africa to Latin America, nations rich in resources but short on technology often walk a tightrope between foreign partnerships and domestic politics. When those relationships collapse, it is usually ordinary people, not elites, who bear the heaviest costs. All right, let's transition into the main story. If agriculture was the starting point, oil quickly became the centerpiece of China's engagement in Niger. Back in 2003, Western oil giants explored Niger's reserves but walked away, claiming the risks outweighed the profits. China, however, made a different calculation. Chinese firms signed a 22-year agreement with the Nigerian government, launching the Agadem oil field project, an integrated plan covering exploration, drilling, pipelines, and refining. The results were transformative. Under Chinese management, the Agadem field came online with proven recoverable reserves of more than 320 million barrels. A modern refinery in Zinder followed, capable of processing 20,000 barrels a day. For the first time, Niger no longer depended solely on importing fuel. Instead, it met domestic demand and even became an oil exporter. The price of fuel inside the country plummeted, falling from around $2.50 per liter to just $1. China also built a 462-kilometer crude pipeline cutting across the desert, completing Niger's first full oil value chain. The impact was enormous. Oil projects accounted for roughly 10% of Niger's GDP, contributed about 1/8 of the government tax revenue, and created thousands of jobs. For ordinary Nigerians, this meant cheaper energy, more schools and clinics funded by taxes, and a glimpse of what resource wealth could bring when developed properly. It showed how strategic partnerships, if managed well, could rewrite a country's economic story. With domestic production rising, Niger turned to the next big step, exporting oil on a massive scale. For that, the country needed a pipeline. And once again, Chinese companies were central to the plan. In October 2021, construction officially began on the Niger-Benin oil pipeline, the largest infrastructure project since Niger gained independence in 1960. Stretching nearly 2,000 kilometers, the pipeline runs from Koulel in Niger to the port of Sime in Benin, with about two-thirds of the route crossing Niger's desert. Once finished, it is expected to carry close to 1 million barrels of oil per day. To support this, massive infrastructure is being built at the port: storage tanks, power facilities, and even submarine pipelines to load ships. The stakes are huge. By the time of its completion, more than 90% of Niger's oil exports will rely on this single pipeline. In other words, the project is not just an energy lifeline, but the backbone of the country's future economy. For a nation with a GDP under $20 billion, revenues from oil exports could be transformational, potentially funding schools, hospitals, and roads. Similar to other African states blessed with resources, Niger saw this project as its chance to join the ranks of significant oil exporters. By the end of 2023, Niger had achieved something remarkable. It had become a crude oil producer and gradually an exporter. Annual exports exceeded 500,000 tons, generating more than $1.3 billion in revenue. Chinese oil projects alone contributed roughly 10% of Niger's GDP, added 12.5% to tax revenues, and created over 4,000 jobs. Beyond the numbers, these projects funded improvements in healthcare, education, and basic services, directly benefiting ordinary Nigerians. Proven reserves reached around 6 billion barrels by 2025. While not enormous by global standards, for a country with an annual GDP under $20 billion, this represents hundreds of billions of dollars in potential revenue. According to the International Monetary Fund, Niger's economic growth could reach 15% or more in the coming year, with oil's share of GDP rising from 4% to 28%. In short, Niger's oil boom, powered by Chinese investment and expertise, was transforming the nation. Yet here's the catch. This economic miracle was almost entirely dependent on China. Without Beijing's technical know-how, capital, and management experience, Niger could not have developed its oil sector at this scale. The country's newfound prosperity was fragile, hinging on the continuation of a cooperative partnership with China. Across Africa, this underscores a broader reality. Resource wealth alone doesn't guarantee growth. Strategic foreign partnerships can unlock potential, but disrupting them can bring immediate consequences for millions. Surprisingly, despite a decade of friendly cooperation, Niger suddenly turned against its Chinese partners. In 2025, the government closed Chinese-run refineries and expelled Chinese employees, citing so-called salary disputes. Officials argued that Chinese managers earned 3 to 4 times more than local workers and failed to hire enough local subcontractors. But honestly, the reality was more complex. Working conditions for Chinese staff were extremely harsh. Temperatures often soared above 50 degrees Celsius, malaria and meningitis were common, and basic infrastructure was almost non-existent. Chinese engineers brought advanced technology and global expertise, while local workers faced low education levels and limited vocational training, making it difficult to compete. The salary gap was in many ways an inevitable reflection of these differences. Behind the scenes, Niger was facing a serious fiscal crisis. Foreign reserves were critically low, barely enough to cover 2 to 3 months of imports. The country had borrowed $400 million from Chinese oil companies in 2024, but delayed repayment. Negotiations faltered when Niger demanded an unrealistic increase in its share of oil profits from 15% to 30%. When the Chinese side refused, the government escalated, demanding over $1.1 billion in taxes and pressing for new loans. For ordinary Nigerians, this political maneuvering was invisible, but the stage was set for a crisis that would soon hit every household. China's reaction to Niger's sudden aggression was swift and decisive. Beijing suspended the Niger-Benin pipeline project and withdrew technical personnel from the refineries, immediately cutting off a crucial source of foreign exchange for the military government. At the same time, China filed an international arbitration case under the China-Africa Investment Protection Agreement, seeking compensation for the losses caused by Niger's actions. Beyond legal measures, China also leveraged influence through international organizations, including the African Union, to pressure Niger into reconsidering its approach. The result was rapid and dramatic. Within a week, Niger's oil production plummeted by around 70%, sparking a nationwide fuel crisis. Gas stations across the country ran dry, black market prices soared, and even basic electricity became unreliable. Factories and shops in the capital Niamey were forced to shut down, and ordinary citizens struggled to cook, travel, or power their homes. For Niger's military government, the consequences were immediate and severe. The very technicians they had dismissed as non-essential turned out to be indispensable for operating complex oil facilities. And the economic shock revealed a harsh truth. The country's newfound prosperity was fragile, highly dependent on foreign expertise, and not something that could simply be replaced by local staff overnight. The fallout hit ordinary Nigerians hardest. Within days, diesel prices skyrocketed from 60 cents per liter to $2.40, a four-fold increase. For a country where the average annual income is just $642, this price surge was catastrophic. Fuel shortages quickly became a national emergency. Black markets thrived, but for most families, buying oil was simply out of reach. Electricity supplies also collapsed, leaving large parts of Niamey in darkness at night. Shops and factories shut down, and daily life came to a near standstill. Even basic activities like cooking or commuting became major challenges. To manage the crisis, Niger urgently borrowed 300 tanker trucks of gasoline from neighboring Nigeria, a temporary stopgap that barely scratched the surface of nationwide demand. The sudden economic shock also triggered social unrest. Unemployed workers protested in the streets, and the military government faced mounting pressure to stabilize the situation. Fiscal deficits widened as the state attempted to maintain order, deepening the country's financial strain. Niger's experience is a stark reminder. In resource-dependent nations, disrupting key foreign partnerships can immediately harm ordinary people. Across Africa and the global south, similar lessons emerge. Development requires both strategic investment and careful management of international relationships. Faced with a spiraling fuel crisis and soaring prices, Niger appears to be reconsidering its approach. The government now understands that offending China came with consequences far more severe than anticipated. Within just a week of expelling Chinese personnel, the country plunged into economic chaos, highlighting how critical foreign expertise and investment had become for its survival. China's reputation across Africa is strong, built over decades through development projects that genuinely improve people's lives. From roads and bridges to schools and hospitals, Chinese investments have helped many nations escape long-standing cycles of poverty. Niger's abrupt policy shift disrupted not only these projects but also the livelihoods of ordinary citizens, creating a crisis that could have been avoided with more careful negotiation. The question now is whether China will return. Given its past investments, totaling billions of dollars in capital, manpower, and technology, Beijing has a clear interest in protecting its foothold. Yet future cooperation will depend on Niger's attitude and willingness to honor agreements. For the global south, this situation underscores a broader lesson. International partnerships are delicate, and the cost of mismanagement often falls hardest on everyday people rather than political elites. That's the story for today. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our next video. Think global, think AY Global.